Welcome to Street Knowledge with Chris Graham.
We got some breaking news to talk about here on our Friday podcast. Chris Graham and Scott German, and we're going to talk some college sports news, but really, for the most part, college football news, Scott. Breaking story as of about an hour ago, as we're recording late Friday morning on The Athletic, about something we kind of referenced last week, Scott, the idea that the Big Ten, Pac-12, and ACC are thinking through the possibility of an alliance that could at least counter the SEC in some way. And Scott, we've both read the story several times as we were discussing before we hit record, and we're still trying to make sense of all this. And I don't know that it makes a lot of sense at first glance and several other glances.
Chris, it hasn't made a lot of sense to me since I first heard it. And I will confess I haven't spent a lot of time delving into it to try to look at all the ins and outs of it, but I haven't been able to really come up to reach any conclusions of how this benefits the ACC. I mean, we're way behind the Big Ten in revenue as it is. I'm not sure where this, other than just the scheduling alliance. I'm really kind of puzzled as to where this is going and why it's going down this path.
So reporting from Nicole Auerbach at The Athletic suggests, and this is again as of about 10:30 Friday morning, and we're talking about 11:30 Friday morning. Her reporting suggests that the Big Ten, Pac-12, ACC are looking to forestall the college football playoff that we've been told for a couple months is an inevitability, the expansion of it from 4 to 12. Concerns expressed supposedly about the formation of that 4-member working group that proposed the playoff expansion, and then that there weren't, I guess, any representatives necessarily of those conferences, which I haven't looked at the makeup, so I'll take the word for it of the story. And the idea that it looks like the inevitability includes ESPN getting that playoff. The Big Ten and Pac-12 have relationships with the Fox network. Big Ten makes the most money of anybody in college sports from its TV contract. The SEC second. The ACC is actually a distant fifth compared to those top two anyway. So the ACC, though, is an ESPN affiliate, if you want to say. The ACC network is an ESPN entity. The ACC is signed with ESPN through the 26-2037 season. And so here the ACC is throwing itself, it seems, according to this report from The Athletic, Nicole Auerbach, with two conferences that make more money and are aligned with Fox. And somehow this benefits the ACC. Scott, I got to say it. I've wondered about the ACC naming a new commissioner to replace John Swofford from outside of the conference, outside of the territory. Jim Phillips, the new conference commissioner, is from Big Ten territory. He's from the North. He's from Northwestern, and for some reason, our new commissioner is steering us towards something that seems like it would not make us as much money.
I agree. Now, there was also a story that former Big Ten commissioner Jim Delaney, who retired, maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, is now working with some of the commissioners with his own company. He has an advising, a consulting corporation based out of Nashville. And he's also now working, it doesn't list specific commissioners, but it says he is an advisor for new commissioners. So I would assume that would mean Jim Phillips of the ACC, about overseeing expanding television revenues. So it could be that Mr. Delaney is kind of creating his own little cottage industry there.
Which is good for him. But for the ACC, again, the ACC's locked into a contract with ESPN through 2036, 2037. Scott, I don't know how old you'll be then. I'll be old by then. I'll be 65 in 2037. So that's a long ways off for the ACC to be locked into a contract. And you know, the Big Ten is different. Delaney, when he was signing contracts for the Big Ten, I was just reading another piece from Andy Staples on The Athletic as we were talking, and the Big Ten does its contract renewals every 6 years. The ACC signed a 20-year deal back in 2016, 2017. So every 6 years you can renew, and that's great. If you want to, a bigger slice of the pie, you could do that. The ACC under John Swafford, probably not smart on John Swafford's part, not good negotiating to do a 20-year deal, because you got to presume that TV rights are going to go up every so often. TV rights fees are going to go up every so often, but the ACC is locked in. So I would say if the Big Ten and Pac-12 want to do whatever they want to do, and if they wanted to work with the Big 12, because the Big 12 has its contract split between ESPN and Fox 50-50. If those three conferences wanted to work together, that's fine. The ACC, geographically and otherwise, in terms of TV deals, needs to align itself with the SEC. This just makes no sense.
I agree. I'm still trying to figure out what scheduling. Why do we need a scheduling allowance if we've got what are we playing, a 9-game conference schedule?
We're playing an 8-game conference schedule. I think the scheduling alliance rhetoric is just that. I don't think there's really anything here about scheduling, because if you play 8 games and you have a 11 or 12 game schedule, right now we're playing a 12-game schedule, but if you go back to 11, if there's an expanded playoff, if you do that, you have 3 non-conference games. Everybody wants to play at least one patsy, if not 2. But if you play just one, you still only have 2 or 3 other games left to schedule. And, there's 3 conferences there. Would you schedule 1 game against each of those conferences as your non-conference? That's just a red herring. Let's just say that's a throw you off the scent kind of thing. This is really about money. And again, if I'm the Big Ten and Pac-12, I'm all for joining together and figuring out a way to keep ESPN from. If here's a good negotiating strategy. The only way this makes any sense for the ACC is if you say, "Hey, let's get Fox in the bidding so that they bid it up, so that Fox and ESPN have to bid against each other, and the winner pays a lot more than they would have if you just give it to one entity." I can see that because that makes more money for everybody. But the idea, if Fox gets the playoff, I don't know that makes any more money for the ACC necessarily. I don't know. The ACC regular season is tied to ESPN. Certainly, basketball is tied to ESPN. This feels like to me that we hired a guy from the Midwest and he's negotiating against our interest.
Yeah, I agree with you. If there's to me, if you're going to hitch your wagon up to someone, the ACC should be trying to do whatever they can do to align with the SEC. Makes sense geographically. They both share the same television network, ESPN. To go to the Pac-12 and to the Big Ten, this reeks of some of the current commissioner's previous background, his resume of being a Big Ten guy.
Yeah, and the geographic footprint also important. I mean, it's not like you're going to say, "Hey, now we have a scheduling alliance with the Big Ten and Pac-12 as part of the red herring that we presented for this whole thing to come together." So Georgia and Georgia Tech, you can't play anymore. Clemson and South Carolina, you can't play anymore. Florida State, you can't play anymore. That's not going to happen. So
it's not going to happen.
Those schools are going to play each other. So and the geographic footprint, Louisville, Kentucky can't play each other. No, it's not going to be that. So I guess breaking this down, the other part of this that's odd is that they want to delay the college football playoff, which all estimates that I've seen from media rights analysts say this makes so much more money for college football, and we're talking on order of $500 million to $1 billion a year more for college football, that the piece of the pie for everybody is much bigger than it is for the 14 playoff plus the bowls arrangement that we have right now. Why do you want to delay that? That's Scott. We keep talking about how the answer to everything in sports is money. Why is the answer to this one less money? Is what it seems like to me.
Yeah, good question. So I'm maybe this is just too simplistic of an approach, but so the SEC has gone to 16 teams, or yes, apparently will be.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Why doesn't the ACC, the Big 12, or the Pac-12, the Big Ten just do whatever they need to do to expand. So we have 4 16-team conferences, 64 teams. Expand the playoff field to 12 or maybe 8 and go from there. Wouldn't that make more money for everyone?
Well, I don't know that expanding your conference makes you more money automatically. That's the first thing I'd say.
Well, I guess it would if the television, if the TV networks think it's a better product.
Well, it would if that's the case, but
but it's not always going to be a better product.
Well, and it could be, but I without having read the contract, and those contracts I'm sure are hundreds of pages long. The ACC, as I mentioned, is under contract to ESPN through 2037. So unless there's some way, and I would hope this was the case, but unless there's some way to say, hey, increased revenues means you get more money from us, and here's your share of that. You add right now the ACC's got 14 full-time football members, the 1 part-time member, Notre Dame. You add another school, and all you're doing is having another handout there at wanting another piece of the pie instead of, let's just use the example I've tried to offer West Virginia as the logical one that I see. You add West Virginia to the fold. All right, they bring West Virginia fans, and they bring some interesting matchups on the regional and national scale, but they also want their equal share of the pie. If you're the Big Ten, I think there's 14 members there. You add 2 more members. That's 2 more hands out for pieces of the pie. And so the Pac-12 would need to add 4 more members and 4 more hands out for pieces of the pie. We're not increasing the number of football games. There's still going to be the same number of football games. We're just dividing them up differently as to how they get packaged and broadcast. They're now going to, if you move some Big 12 teams to the Pac-12, move some Big 12 teams to the Big Ten and the ACC, you could certainly make yourself 4 16-team conferences, but you're still going to have the same number of games those teams are all playing. It's just going to go under different aegises, so to speak. So I don't know that it guarantees more money. I don't know that you have to expand. I don't know that the SEC went from 14 to 16 just to go from 14 to 16. They went from 14 to 16 because Oklahoma and Texas were interested in going to the SEC. And those are 2 schools. You don't refuse them when they want to go to your conference. So unless there's something obvious like that, I don't know that you just run out there and take a team in or 2 teams in or 2 schools in and say, now we're good.
Well, so has there been any talk that the SEC is going to get a new TV contract, a new deal with ESPN now that Texas and Oklahoma apparently are heading to the SEC?
I don't. They had signed a contract apparently last year that will start in 2024. I don't know without again having read the contract details or seen anything about the contract details, how that's going to be affected by Oklahoma and Texas coming. I can't answer that question very well. So I guess the answer is right now it's up in the air. I would assume that those schools aren't moving without getting more money, and that the SEC doesn't want them without getting more money. But again, those are different entities. If you're the ACC, again, there's no one on the order of Oklahoma or Texas that you can add to the ACC. I'm suggesting West Virginia if you're just looking for a 16th member. But there's no one like Oklahoma and Texas that's a free agent right now. I don't count Notre Dame because we talked about this last week. I don't see Notre Dame ever becoming a full-fledged football member of the ACC for lots of reasons. So, but even if they did, they're 15th, and we already have them as a partial member now. So I don't know.
We talked about that. Yeah, we talked about the whether or not it would actually be that big of a monetary gain for the ACC side or not.
For Notre Dame as well. So if
Notre Dame as well,
there's no one hanging out there like an Oklahoma or Texas that the ACC could get, that the Big Ten could get. Certainly the Pac-12 could. There's no one like Oklahoma and Texas out there. So I don't know why you'd expand just to expand.
Well, and you're right, because just adding a 16th team, all you're doing is bringing one more seat to the table.
Yeah.
You're not increasing the pot, and you actually could walk away from that deal. Each school would walk away maybe making less money per school.
Because there's no guarantee. Yeah,
there's no guarantee. And as you said, the only carrot out there that could possibly guarantee that would be for Notre Dame to come in and Notre Dame basically to say we're scrapping the NBC deal.
Yeah, our solo NBC deal. Yeah,
and that would be that's not going to happen.
That's not going to happen. No.
The AD, the board of directors, the chancellors, whomever should be fired on the spot if that was the case. So for the ACC, expansion is not going to directly mean more money for each school. So I'm not sure what the answer would be, but I don't see how the Pac-12 Big Ten alliance is going to help anything at all.
I don't either. I'm and maybe we'll learn more as the next few days roll on about how this could benefit the ACC. I see tremendous benefit to the Big Ten and Pac-12. Unbelievable benefit to Fox because they get to be a player in this expanded college football playoff. The ACC just seems to be enabling other people to make a lot more money at their expense, and that's unfortunate.
Chris, we almost a month ago to the day, we were down in Charlotte at the ACC kickoff, and I actually went to the grand ballroom or whatever that was, where Commissioner Phillips took the podium and addressed the media. And I have to be sort of judicious on how I say this, but I don't think when he was finished and the media, we all gathered and I think we went to lunch or something. I don't think there was a consensus there that he blew the doors off of anybody. I just don't, he certainly did not impress me that much. I mean, I'm not sure. I got the feeling that he was more that Midwesterner guy. He just wasn't, maybe it was because we've been so used to Commissioner Swofford and one of the Tobacco Road boys, so to speak, and we bring in this Midwesterner. I don't know, maybe that had something to do with it, but I really wasn't that overly impressed with Phillips. What do you think the consensus is and maybe what is your thoughts on him, on Phillips?
I'll just say, as you talk about that, I didn't go to that forum, so I don't have a personal impression. I'd say that it's always been curious to me ever since the announcement was made that we went outside the conference to get a new guy. I think about that in context. I'll use this example. When you hire a new football coach for your school, some schools will hire, it's depending on the situation, obviously, but let's just say that John Swofford wasn't leaving because he was being fired. Okay, so let's make this into a situation where the previous coach was retiring, not because he was being fired.
And I don't think he was even being pushed out the door.
No, he wasn't. There was nothing. Nobody had any issues with Swofford. He just aged out, and he was ready to go and enjoy his senior years. Right. So let's use the equation of a football coach who's retiring on top. And so normally what happens in those situations is you have two options. You can hire from within or you can hire from without. Hey, I should use a better example. We have the two highest profile jobs in college basketball just got filled this same way. Nobody's pushing Roy Williams out. Nobody's pushing Coach K out at Carolina and Duke. And what did they do? They hired from within. They didn't look outside. They hired from within, right? The ACC wasn't pushing John Swofford out. He wasn't being fired. He wasn't being told to retire. He just was riding. He's riding off into the sunset. And instead, we went with option B, which is this would be like if Carolina went and hired Bill Self, who has no ties to Carolina, or Tony Bennett with no ties to Carolina. You'd be saying, we have all these guys we could hire from within. We're going to go and find someone else. We want to start over, is what you're saying when you do that. Duke, same way. If Duke had hired some other high-profile coach, no ties to Duke. We went outside. There's probably plenty of people with ACC ties. John Swofford was a Carolina grad. He worked at UVA, went back, and then he was at the ACC. He's an ACC guy. He knows where everything is on tobacco. You don't need to give him directions anywhere in the ACC. Jim Phillips not only needs directions to where he needs to go on Tobacco Road. He probably still is learning where all the bathrooms are in the ACC headquarters. There's plenty of guys we could have hired from within. We decided, hey, let's go get a guy from Chicago. And we went and got a guy from Chicago. So what that signals to me is that the people who made this decision, the ACC presidents who made this decision, said, I don't know the reason. They wanted a new, fresh start, and they wanted someone, whatever Jim Phillips brings to the table. I couldn't tell you. I don't know his bio that well, but they saw something there. Maybe this isn't just Jim Phillips doing this. maybe this is ACC president signaling, hey, we want to do something different here. We've been tied to the SEC for so long. John Swofford, a Southern guy, ACC, SEC have this long-standing relationship. Maybe going out and getting a guy like Phillips from a different part of the world with different ties, different connections. Maybe that was the first signal that the ACC was changing.
That's a possibility. I will say this, as we both have been longtime followers of ACC, it is, especially in Greensboro, if you go to an ACC tournament, you get to go behind the curtain, so to speak, as we do with media credentials. You know, it is very much a good old boys network.
Yeah.
A lot of backslapping, people there that have been in those jobs for 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, it's surprising because, you know, if they wanted to fill within, there's plenty of people there that has experience that could have just, you know, flawlessly transitioned into that job. So yeah, there was a reason they went outside of the network, outside of the framework of the good old boy system.
Yeah, and not just the good old boys, not even just in the ACC office or former ACC office people who maybe went and got jobs at other conferences as they got, you know, exactly what happens. You kind of jump your way up the ladder. But we hired Northwestern's athletics director, right? So there's 15 athletics directors in the ACC, plus a few former athletics directors that you could have hired from the ACC that had recent tenure. So there's a population of, let's say, 50 people, men and women, that you could have said, hey, we want this person to be our new commissioner. And and obviously consciously went outside the conference. Maybe looking back, we should have foreseen this. I mean, now it makes sense. 2020 hindsight, it makes sense that the ACC is now suddenly in league with and let's not even worry about the Pac-12 part of this. The Pac-12 is the little brother of the Big 12. It's kind of like Texas and Oklahoma. When Texas decided it was going to go to the SEC, Oklahoma had to. So same thing here. Big 12 wants to do something. They got a person in place in the ACC to work with them. The Pac-12 says, yes, just tell us when to be there. But that's where we are right now. I don't think it's good for the ACC, but I'm just suspicious of everybody. So factor that out when I say that.
Yeah. We'll you know, we'll see. It could be that they just wanted to go in a different direction, wanted some new ideas, and Jim Phillips certainly brought that. You know, he brought that from the Big Ten. So I want to shift a little bit. I just was reading some of my notes. Alcohol will now be served in Scott Stadium, and you can actually take it to your seats. Good idea or bad idea?
From a revenue standpoint, it's a wonderful idea, revenue standpoint wise. And I think too, you know, my experience with JPJ and concerts, I'll call on here. They, you know, you're limited to purchasing, I think it's 4 drinks. And of course, I mean, now you got to wonder, at concerts at least, and then you got to wonder, okay, how does that person drive himself home? Well, hopefully they're with somebody, and you can't rely on that. But then there's lots of cops around when you're leaving, so issues there. Maybe that means that the drinking will be more regulated. It's not like no one's ever had alcohol in their seats in Scott Stadium. Let's just say that. It was until I covered my first game as a young journalist that I realized that Scott Stadium didn't entirely smell like bourbon. This because the student section smells like bourbon, like whiskey, like lots of things, not just natural air. So we can stop pretending, I guess, that beer is like the lightest of the things. So maybe the availability of beer and wine, because wine will be available too. Maybe the availability of beer and wine will prevent people from bringing their own flask in, and UVA can make the money instead of your liquor store. But so I think in the end it's going to be a good idea, and certainly from a money standpoint. I will say, we work the games. We're there in the press box, so it's not like I'll be running down from the press box to go get a beer or anything. But my wife occasionally goes to games with friends, and 2 years ago, because last year, of course, there were no fans of games, but 2 years ago, they had beer garden areas, and her complaint was because her and a friend would go buy a cider and stand in the beer garden. The complaint was those beer garden designated areas were nowhere near the field. There was like one little TV. You couldn't really see the game. And so they did it once and then they didn't do it anymore. So I'm sure that didn't make any money for UVA, and it certainly wasn't a good fan experience. So the idea that you can take the beer back, the beer, wine, cider, whatever back, is going to be good for revenue. It's going to be good for fans, and hopefully we can just make sure that everybody gets home safe.
Hey, Chris, this is kind of ironic. I was reading my news message on this. Is that in order to make sure that they set the right in, and I'm paraphrasing this, but it's going to be sold throughout various locations throughout Scott Stadium, but will not be sold anywhere near the student section.
Yeah,
that's really noble of them, don't you think?
It's really going to control all that bourbon and whiskey that's still going to get consumed in that section. Yeah. No, I haven't been to a game in the student section since the fall of 1993. But as I'm talking about it right now, I can still smell what the student section smells like from 30 years ago. And it's not that bourbon's a bad smell. It's just what I thought every UVA game smelled like. And then being on the other side of the stadium up in the press box, I'm like, whoa, it's not the same here. So, and I guess students who are over 21 can obviously walk to one of those other sections and buy a beer or a wine or a cider, and they won't be allowed to carry. I assume they won't be allowed to carry it into the student section, but they'll still be able to buy it there. So, but no, it's going to be great for revenue, man. I tell you, this is going to be a tremendous revenue boost for UVA athletics. And I don't have an account on this, but I know that other ACC schools and other schools, across the country have allowed sales like that for a number of years. So UVA is just kind of catching up.
Yeah, and obviously, it's revenue has got to be a source, because there got to be a concern, because there was very little last year. So schools are having to be a little, creative, and this is something that we knew was going to happen eventually.
And other things they're going to do too. I know we have a lot of UVA fan listeners, and the season's only 2 weeks away. The home opener is 2 weeks from tomorrow night. It'll be the most anticipated UVA William & Mary game in history, just because of the fact that we didn't have any home games last year with more than a couple hundred fans. All concession and merchandise locations have cashless options, so that's catching up to the real world too. Anybody who's been to a Major League Baseball game recently knows that that's a big deal. There's a new Cavalier Fan Fest location. There's metal detectors that you'll be required to use, so be ready for that. The bag policy is still the same. Not only my wife has to make sure clear plastic, but she's used to that. She's got clear plastic bags just for the purpose of going into games at Scott Stadium and JPJ. Some in-game enhancements that are interesting: life-size fourth side letters located to the northeast concourse for photos. Everybody loves taking selfies these days. The student section will unveil a giant fourth side, something called a TIFO, which I'll have to look up what that is. I'm not hip to what the teens and 20-somethings are doing these days, but apparently it's something at kickoff each day. Pageantry posters, a DJ, an in-stadium host, and then here's an interesting one. Ahmad Hawkins is going to serve as an in-stadium football analyst. Scott, I don't know if you read through that part. I'm still trying to figure out what Ahmad Hawkins is going to be doing as an in-stadium football analyst. I'm guessing in between timeouts when they're not playing loud thumping music, Ahmad Hawkins is going to give us commentary. That's what I'm imagining.
I saw that, and that's exactly what I thought. And I also think that's going to be an ultimate disaster.
I love Ahmad Hawkins. He's great.
I do too, but that's just not going to work.
I don't know how that works in game, because they only have 3-minute TV commercial breaks, and they're playing loud thumping music. They're playing those silly games, and when
they're not playing music, they're playing the silly games that make revenue.
They make revenue, yeah, because they're ad sponsored. And then Ahmad Hawkins is going to somehow, with like 20 seconds of airtime, if he gets that, is going to give us, hey, the Cavs need to do this, or the Who's need to do that. I will look forward to seeing how that works. And I love Ahmad Hawkins. I'm looking forward to seeing how that works.
Yeah. Yep. So am I. So I've tried to avoid this as long as I could. And we've been doing this podcast for how long now?
Oh gosh, years. I don't even want to.
Today's podcast.
Oh, today's podcast. Oh, about 30 minutes or so.
30 minutes. So the 1,000-pound elephant is in the corner of the room.
Uh-huh.
And I can't ignore it anymore. So can we switch to baseball for just a little bit?
Oh, what's the 1,000-pound elephant in baseball? Are you trying to avoid something, or
I'm trying to avoid talking about my beloved Orioles.
Okay, well, let's talk about your beloved Orioles, which will mean I have to talk about my beloved Nationals, and neither is going to be a good conversation.
No. So the Orioles are on a 15-game losing streak.
Okay.
Which in itself is horrific, especially when you're talking to someone that has at least bits and pieces have watched every one of those 15 games. That in itself is bad, but the Orioles had a 14-game losing streak, and it wasn't one game ago. It was a month ago. So they've endured 2 losing streaks of 14 games and now 15 in holding or counting, excuse me. And lo and behold, wouldn't you just know the schedule makers of Major League Baseball has the hottest team in baseball coming to Camden Yards this weekend in the Atlanta Braves?
Well, yeah, they're hot. They're the hottest team with an asterisk, though. They're 9-1 in their last 10, but 6 of those wins are over the Nats.
Right, but they're still 9. They still won 9 games, and to get to for the Orioles to go back 9 wins, you would probably have to go back to last season.
No, they actually have 38 wins this year.
38 wins. So what does that mean? Is it means the Orioles go on a 3-game winning streak this year?
Oh, because
this weekend.
They ruined the Nats season when they swept that series against the Nats a few weeks ago. I remember, didn't they sweep the Astros a few weeks ago too?
They did in Houston when Houston was red hot.
Yeah. That's a Houston team 71-50 right now. So
yeah. So the Orioles,
sport, man.
So if you're an Oriole fan and you don't like the Nationals, which I'm not, I have no problems with the Nationals. But if you don't like the Nationals, if you're by default, if you're an Orioles fan, you can't be a Nationals fan. You can say the Orioles were probably maybe as responsible for Matt Scherzer and Trey Turner leaving DC as anyone, because that changed the whole dynamics of how the Nationals were looking at the season after being swept out of DC, by the Orioles. So, and I think the Orioles beating Houston 3 straight sent a wake-up call to the Astros, because since then, Houston's played really good baseball. They're back to, I think they lead the division. They do. They lead their division. And so the Orioles are indirectly having some impact on the season.
Yeah, they are. And, but yeah, 15 straight losses after, as you mentioned, a 14-game losing streak. Hey, I got to ask you, I read a piece about the Deadspin website actually wrote about the Orioles, which must have meant it was a slow news day. It was one day this week. So of course they wrote about the long losing streaks, multiple of them, and the future of this team. What about Trey Mancini? Isn't he up after next year? What happens to him?
Yeah, next year is the last year of his of team control.
I'm surprised he didn't go in at the trade deadline this year. If you use the same reasoning the Nats used, the Nats had team control of Trey Turner until the end of next year, and decided that he was more valuable to trade this year as opposed to next year, because you give a guy up at the trade deadline like they gave up Scherzer, you don't always get a top prospect for that guy. A lot of folks are looking at that trade with the Dodgers and saying that the Nats got those 2 top prospects from the Dodgers, not as much for Scherzer as it was for Turner. So Mancini comes back next year for what? Because they're still not going to be ready to compete for a playoff spot, and he's going to be in his last year of his deal, and he's very valuable. He's proven himself valuable this year. So yeah, so I interrupted, but I had to throw that in because wow, I guess at this stage you just bring him back next year.
Well, I think from what I have read, that they felt like they would be able to, if they were to go in a different direction from Trey, which I'm not so sure they are, because he's such a fan favorite. His story is just amazing. That they felt like they could orchestrate a better deal over the winter, because what they were getting and putting him out there as trade bait, they weren't really all that impressed with. So the thought was that they would look at the winter meetings and see what the trade market looked like. And if they weren't comfortable, if they didn't like what they saw, they would negotiate a contract with Mancini, which he has apparently told the Orioles he would like to stay in Baltimore, which in itself is another story about wondering how his health is. But, he's apparently given the club indications that he would not be opposed to signing a 3 or 4 year deal.
So if I have this right, isn't also John Means up after next year?
Means is as well, and I really look for Means to be traded during the offseason.
Okay, trade during the offseason. Okay.
Yeah.
Now Mancini next year's 30 years old, so that's an interesting thing too. I mean, for a team that's trying to go young, to keep a guy, he's going to be expensive. I have to assume he's going to be expensive. For the most part,
he's probably going to be a $15 to $20 million a year player.
Yeah.
So a 4-year deal is going to get him close to $80 million.
So you expect Means to be traded, so not a continued part of the rebuild. That's interesting.
No, I don't. I think Means will be traded. Mancini, I believe, if my gut feeling is that because of his story, because of his favorite, he's just a huge favorite with the fan base. I think that Mancini's going to, and I believe he's going to kind of give not that this exists in Major League Baseball, but I think if there is such a thing as the hometown discount, he may allow the Orioles to present him an offer like that, maybe 4 years, $75 to $80 million, which I think the club would, they certainly can afford it.
Is there anyone else? It looks like the other key parts of this rebuild: Mountcastle, Mullins, Santander.
Those are all. Those are not. There's none of those are going to be traded.
There's none of those are trade guys. Okay.
No, maybe Santander possibly, but I think they like what they see in those guys, and I don't unless they get blown away during the offseason. Now, there's a couple of guys there that I think would be good trade bait, because the Orioles are running low on things like rosin bags and Gatorade and double bubble. And there's a couple of guys I think could get them some serious double bubble.
How far off would you assess this rebuild is? We know that the model here is the Houston model, I guess the most recent model we've seen. I mean, this rebuild concept dates back. I think Cleveland did this really well back in the 80s. Their mid-90s teams were really good, and maybe they set the tone for this. But the Houston most recently, Houston had those 3 or 4 straight 100-loss seasons, and then obviously built themselves up into a World Series champion and a World Series contender, and they still are at this stage. But it took some pain to get there for the Houston fans. How far off do you think Baltimore could be from being a contender again?
Well, first of all, I for a long time I wasn't convinced it could happen, but I'm looking at number one reason that it can happen. Right now, I'm looking at it right now on my computer screen, and it says Tampa Bay, 75 wins and 47 losses. Mm-hmm. And this is not this is not a flash in the pan year. They've been consistent. And they do it through great drafting, great player development, and knowing when to get rid of players and know when to let them walk and when to recover the most from, trading those players. I'm hoping that next year you're going to see some of the prospects with the team when they break spring training. I think realistically next year the goal might be to get to 500, close to 500, and then the year after that maybe being a team that can compete for a wild card. So I'm saying a couple of years probably, but if you follow the club as intently as I do, this isn't just a rebuild. This is just, I mean, they imploded everything, and developing their farm system, developing their international player development, the academy that they've spent, I think it was $200 million for in the Dominican Republic to sign Dominican players. They're just, this is being done for long term, that they won't be able to be the Yankees or Red Sox, and they're going to have to look at the model like Tampa and get players, keep players 4 or 5 years, and when their walk years come, they have to know when to get rid of them.
I'm looking at their stats for this year, and so you mentioned that you think that Means is probably a trade guy in the offseason. Is there anyone who has started a number of games for them this year that you think is around in a couple of years when they become a contender? Is there anybody like I see Jorge Lopez? I mean, he's got horrible numbers, but I've seen him pitch against the Nats. He looked good in that one start against the Nats. Dean Kramer, Bruce Zimmerman, Keegan Aiken. Any of those guys still around in a couple of years?
Maybe Aiken and Lopez, and the only reason I say that is because they have the endorsement of Jim Palmer.
Okay,
and Palmer has worked with them, has watched them, their mechanics, and feels as though they are capable of being good, reliable, everyday pitchers. The rest of them, no, they won't be anywhere near Baltimore when the club is competitive again.
Hey, for our UVA fan listeners out there, I just noticed a name that showed up here. I don't watch the O's every night like you do. I watch the Nats every night. Brandon Waddell was obviously a midseason pickup. I think he was with Cleveland. Now he's pitching inning for the O's.
Yeah, I saw that, and as much as I'd like to see UVA pitchers come there, I'm almost feel sorry for him because he's just he's not getting good defensive support. It's just. I guess it's a job, he's on a major league roster,
He's on a major league roster. He's pitching in the big leagues. He's in the show, all those different things. His stats this year overall, including his time in Cleveland, 5.68 ERA, one scoreless inning for the O's, but 5.68 ERA and a 2.13 WHIP. I think he started a game for Cleveland earlier this year, so interesting to see. Who among the because you're saying maybe only a couple guys in a starting rotation currently will be around in a couple years. Talk about maybe the guys that are in the minor league system for the O's who you expect will make the leap in the next couple of years and be a part of that rebuilt rotation.
Well, Rodriguez has really pitched well at Bowie. I got to see him play when he was with Bowie. I'm not sure if he got called up yet. You can look. I think he may be in Norfolk now. Ratzman was sent to Norfolk, and he's tearing the league up, which was not expected because from what I've been told, the real competition, the real level of player talent is at the AA level more so than at AAA. Rodriguez is probably the pitcher that's going to stand the best chance of making the roster, making the out of spring training next year. It's just inevitable that they're going to have to bring these guys on and start their free agent clock sooner or later. So I think Rodriguez would be the one that would come to mind more so than some others.
So you're expecting what would it be? The 2023 season would be a season with some optimism.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
That's interesting. Hey, it's been a while. There was a good run under Buck Showalter back in the mid 2010s. That team was a playoff contender and a playoff team for a few years there. And so it's been a little bit of dry spell for UO's fans, but good to see that there's some light at the end of the tunnel there.
Yeah, and as fun as that was with Buck, and I was at a couple of playoff games when they were with I think 2014. You could tell it was a house of cards because the minor league system was terribly rated. They were among the worst in the of their minor league farm system was rated among the worst. They weren't signing international players. They weren't using any of their international bonus money. It was almost like they were, going for broke and trying to put the best team at the major league level that they could, knowing that eventually, sooner than later, the bottom was going to fall out of this and leave us to where we are now. And where we are now is the complete overhaul of the system, complete rebuild from the international the player development to signing. They're now spending money in signing these international players, which 3 or 4 years ago they weren't using any of that money. I think within 2 years this team will be, I won't say World Series level team, but I think they'll be a playoff caliber team.
It's interesting when you bring that up. That's what the Deadspin article was about the other day. It was about how hard it is to kind of play both, because a lot of folks don't think about this. I think when you watch your favorite baseball team play, you don't think about when you run a Major League Baseball team, you're really running two different organizations. You're running your Major League organization and you're running your minor league organization. And how weird it is that it seems like it's hard to run both well. It's hard to win at the big league level and also stock your minor league so that you can continue to win. It seems like the good teams are good at the major league level. That is, are good there. And then at some point they get old and then they have to start over. Unless you're either the Dodgers or Yankees with lots of money, and even then it's not a guarantee. Money doesn't win you. It doesn't buy you championships. For the most part, the Dodgers won last year, but the Dodgers have spent the most money in baseball for about a decade, and they've got the one World Series. And so it is because the Nats are in the same place. When they got to the end of their rope, their end of their rope was around July 2nd when Kyle Schwarber injured his hamstring. They were 2 games out of first place when he injured his hamstring, and now they're a game out of last, and they've traded everybody away except for Juan Soto. But they tried to keep the band together for one more tour, and it didn't work out. The O's tried to keep the band together. I remember us talking on a podcast, Scott, going into that. I think it was a 2017 season when they re-signed Chris Davis, and when they were talking about Zach Britton and some other guys. Could they keep that bullpen together that year for one more run at it? They did, and it didn't work out. And in retrospect, obviously, should have traded a bunch of guys and got what they could have gotten for them. But it's weird how that is, that you can't be, for the most part, you can't be successful at both. The Rays, as you mentioned, seem to be, but I don't know what it is about the Rays because they don't spend any money. They always seem to get rid of guys at the right time. Look at Blake Snell right now. Blake Snell he's got like the second worst strike rate in baseball. They got rid of him at the right time. And they win at the big league level, win at the minor league level. For the most part, the other 29 organizations can't do that.
Well, the way the game's set up too, and I was reading a story too that talking about possibly revamping the way the Major League Draft works to prevent some of these teams from tanking, because there's no doubt right now the Orioles aren't doing anything but that. I'm not saying they even have to try. They are bad. I don't think they have to try to be bad, but if you're good, if you have a good record at the major league level, you're not going to get the real high. You're going to suffer as your draft picks are going to be lower. So it kind of is a catch-22 situation.
You say that, but here's the thing about that. It's not like the NFL or NBA. If you have the number 1 pick in the NBA draft, that guy's playing for you next year. If you have the number 1 pick in the NFL draft, the only reason he's not playing for you is if he's a quarterback and you decide to give him a year of seasoning. And at this stage, if you pick a quarterback number 1, you're probably playing him next year instead of waiting a year or two like they used to do back in the day. So Major League Baseball, you draft a guy number 1. If he's a high school kid, he's not there for 4 or 5 years. If he's a college kid, maybe next year, maybe the year after. So, and plus in Major League Baseball's draft, there's as many guys picked in the 10 plus rounds who make it big as there are in 1 through 10. It's really a crapshoot because you're drafting high school age kids and drafting college kids who still have another year or two at the best, if they're college kids, of seasoning before they can get to the big league level. I don't know why it makes any sense to tank for a draft pick unless there's Bryce Harper sitting out there or Steven Strasburg sitting out there, that once in a generation talent that the Nats happen to get 2 straight years at the cornerstone of their rebuild. But can you think of any other number 1 picks recently that has turned around a franchise? It takes a while. And so, maybe if you're talking about revamping things, the only thing I would revamp would be that service rule thing, the service time thing, because a lot of teams wait until June 1st or something like that in a season before they bring a guy up. I mean, I think Major League Baseball's problem is, they've got too many teams that are tanking because they're trying to protect guys in the minor leagues, not necessarily because they're trying to draft guys. Because man, you draft a 17-year-old high school outfielder, and you tank to get that guy, unless he's Bryce Harper. He may not make it to AAA, much less to the big league. So it's kind of silly to do that. But you're right. A lot of teams do that.
Case in point, this year for the Orioles, there's no Oriole fan. There's no logical, well-informed baseball fan that would not say that the Orioles, that Adley Rutschman is not the best catching prospect in the Orioles organization, but he's not in Baltimore. He's in Norfolk.
Yeah.
And there's one reason he's not in Baltimore. Why would the Orioles bring him to Baltimore earlier this season and have the clock start ticking on a team that's going nowhere? So I'm sure this goes on. You're right. They're trying to. A lot of teams are just bad because they're protecting some of their players in the minor leagues so that they don't start the clock, the free agent clock, which in itself to me might need tweaking.
Well, and if I'm MLBPA, as I'm getting ready to renegotiate my next collective bargaining agreement,
it's going to be a hot topic. Trust me.
Because if you're Adley Rutschman, he was a college guy. He played at Oregon State for 3 years, right? So
he's older.
He's older. He's 24, 25 now. If he doesn't get to the big leagues till next year, his 6 years protected. He's 31 or 32 by the time he's able to sign his first free agent contract as a catcher. He's done by that point, unless they've moved him to first base at some point in that 6 years, which they may very well. So his one chance to make big money, he's already kind of aged out of that. And he's not the only. I mean, he's far from the only one. Chris Bryant was finally up this year. And he got traded as a result, right? So that happens all the time, and it's to the detriment of the player's ability to make money, because now we're starting to see guys who are 29, 30, 31 years old who are ready to finally sign their first big contract. Teams look at them saying, "Hey, man, we've seen declines at guys your age. We're not giving you 6 years at this insane amount of money. We'll give you 3 or 4 at this amount of money." It's bad for the players. It's bad for the fans, because your O's are 38 and 81 right now. And it's been a slog all season long. Excuse me, since the opening weekend. Didn't they sweep the Red Sox opening weekend? It's been a terrible adventure for O's fans all year long. And for what? So that they can have control over Adley Rutschman and a few other guys?
Yeah, and that's obvious. I mean, there's Roger, the kid we just talked about, Rodriguez, would be the number one starter on this team right now. He would be the number one guy, and he's pitching at Bowie. I watched him pitch 2 weeks ago on a 100-degree day at the Diamond, and he could have been the Orioles starting pitcher that night. Probably should have been. And the only reason he's at Bowie is because to protect the club, the big league club, for his clock to start ticking. There's got to be a tweak in that somehow. Yeah. And I can tell you, there's going to be a lot of heated issues at this year's collective bargaining agreement, the table. Many are predicting a work stoppage.
Yeah,
because of such things as what we just talked about.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me based on what we just talked about. That's a big issue, no question about it.
Because the clubs aren't going to want to budge on that, and the Players Association they're going to want a major, Players Association they're going to want to tweak that big time.
Yeah, because it's their ability to make money. Now that we're in the post-steroid era, guys aren't making big money into their mid-30s, and so and that's what this is all about. You're seeing a lot of guys. I mean, we're talking about Trey Mancini. Gosh, I'm talking about him. Do the O's want to trade him away and get the value of him? You could also other teams might say a guy who had just had cancer, who's 30 and 31 years old. Why would we want that guy? And this is his one chance to make money. He's making $4.75 million this year. He's a guy who should, if he'd been called up a year or two earlier, he'd be making $20-30 million this year, and he's making $4.75 million. And that's going to hurt him down the line.
Yeah, and you're right. Even his payday now, his if the Orioles decide to keep him, or if they his big payday is going to be $80 million, probably tops.
Yeah. Instead of
double that,
it should be double that. Right. You feel for a guy like that. You definitely do. A guy who should be ready to rake in the big money. And he's going to make money. I know there's some listeners out there saying he's only making $4.75 million this year. Hey, they're top of their profession guys. We should be for them making as much money as they can, because if it was you in the situation, you would want to make as much money as you could too. You want to maximize your potential. And he's not going to be able to, because of a lot of things, including the collective bargaining agreement. So I'm not looking forward to that, but we're going to be talking probably this fall and this winter, and maybe even in the spring about off the field baseball issues, including the collective bargaining agreement. So.
Yeah, I know a lot of people would say you feel sorry for someone who's making, when you say he's making only 4.whatever million, but again, it's perspective. It's compared to others in his category, he's very underpaid.
Well, and if it was you or I or anyone listening out there in the same position, we would want to maximize our potential as well. Even if all you did with the extra money was give it away to charity, you'd still want to have the ability to do that. The money's out there to be made by somebody. It might as well be you, right? So, I mean, that's the situation. And Trey Mancini's going to be lifted from that. Hey, as we're wrapping up the show here, Scott, 2 weeks from tomorrow night, we will be sitting in a football stadium with more than 200 fans. Now, we'll be wearing masks in the press box, whatever. I don't care. We're going to be in a stadium with 60,000 fans watching the most anticipated UVA William & Mary football game probably in the history of the series.
And I can't wait. If it were tonight, and I haven't felt well this week, I had a bad summer cold, I'd be there tonight. I can promise you. It is. It's going to be the most anticipated Virginia William & Mary game ever. It's probably going to be over by the end of the first quarter. And I doubt that you're going to see a lot of people leave at halftime, even if it's a 40-point lead. I think people are going to want to just sit there and take it in, soak it in.
Yes, I know. I will.
You were in that press box last year, and I was also on the outside looking in, and I know what it was like. So
you were literally on the sidewalk peeking through the little parts you could see through to watch a part of a game. I was in the stadium, and I didn't. God, it was so weird. Yeah, so. Yeah, that's going to be a heck of a. It's a night game too, so it's a heck of a night game. 7:30 kickoff. We'll of course talk more about that. We haven't even thought about, Scott. That's William & Mary, right? You know the coach of William & Mary is
the return of Mike London.
The return of Mike London in 2 weeks. Wow, we get to say hi to Mike. He gets to lose another game in Scott Stadium, so at least that's something he's familiar with. But, we love Mike as a person. He just didn't work out as the coach. But, man, hadn't even thought about that until I started talking about William & Mary. Honestly, I hadn't even thought about the fact that Mike London is going to make his return, because all we care about is there's going to be people in the stands, people buying hot dogs, people now buying beer, taking them to their seats, and football with fans and noise. When UVA scores a touchdown in this game, you're going to hear the noise. You're going to hear the good old song being sung by people. You're going to see the stupid Caveman video up on the screen, and you're going to like it. You're going to like all of it. You're going to love all of it. You're going to cry probably the first time you hear the good old song sung in person in front of you.
Yeah, I agree 100%, and it's going to be a blast.
Well, thanks to Scott German. We talk with Scott every Friday here on the podcast. In-depth ACC, Baltimore Orioles, and UVA football. We'll talk some more with Scott next week, of course. And thank you for listening. Everyone have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Street Knowledge with Chris Graham. Get the latest on the Who's and up-to-the-minute local news, politics, and sports online at AugustaFreePress.com.